Hello everyone. Today I'm going to give you an introduction to loom weaving at home with things that you have just lying around the house. To get started, all you really need is a scrap piece of cardboard, something quite rigid that's cuttable and not too flimsy, something to trace around that's round, good enough for a coaster size. So I've just got an old CD with some software on it, pair of scissors, some ordinary string, doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something that's fairly strong and not too thin like cotton. So embroidery thread, string, wool, they will all do. A marker, a ruler, and also your mobile phone or a calculator to help calculate things. In addition to the materials you need to make the loom itself, as in the functional piece that we'll be weaving on, you need a variety of threads, strings, ropes, ribbons, anything you have lying around the house to actually weave with. And this is what your weave will look like, is based on these choices. So I've got a variety of things which you can use. If you've got some wool lying around the house, that works. If you've got any threads, I've got embroidery thread, as long as it's not thinner than this. Something like cotton would be too thin. I've also torn up a old t-shirt here to make strips of fabric that can easily be used. I've also reclaimed some little ropes and braided threads from gift bags. That's also really good. Or any ribbon you have that's not got any use for, it's also been taken off of some packaging. Or you can use ordinary string that you started off with. And as a last option, you can upcycle some plastic bags to make what we called plan, which is plastic yarn. So it's up to you what combination you want. If you just have one of those, that's perfectly fine, or something similar that will do the job. You could even go and look in the garden or out in the park, see if you can find something there out in nature that will fit the bill, that is weavable. Any combination of these will do. To get started, we need to cut our scrap piece of cardboard into a round shape. We'll be making a coaster for this weave, so I have chosen a CD to trace around. Anything that you've got that's similar, whether it's a small bowl, a ceramic bowl, or even a side plate will also do, but you want something just a few centimeters bigger than the base of the actual coaster will be. So I've got my disc for my loom cut out, and I now need to figure out where the notches are going to be that the thread is going to slot into. So to do that, I'm going to take the string which I'm ultimately going to use to weave on top of, and I'm just going to measure the circumference, the full length of the outside of this circle. So just put it gently around it. You could also measure the CD if you wanted to, or whatever object you used. Pull your string fairly tight just so you can get an accurate measurement of how long it is, and then using your ruler, see how long that piece comes to. So the circumference of my disc is 40 centimeters, and I need to split this into an uneven number of notches which we will put our thread into. I would suggest we do about 21 or 23 notches. So depending on how big yours is, I suggest you divide, using your calculator or your mobile phone, your circumference value by either 21 or 23, and see which number seems easier, because some of them will give you a lot of decimal values. Which one seems easier for you to divide your circle into? So for me, I'm going to divide by 21, which gives me 1.904, etc., etc., etc. And that's easy for me to round up, so I'm going to work on a measurement that is 1.9 centimeters between each notch. So I'm going to take my ruler and I am going to measure out 1.9 centimeters on my piece of string, mark it up. A little bit fiddly, this part, but if we do it properly, it works out really nicely. So 1.9 centimeters, and then I'm going to measure that onto my cardboard. Right, and you should realize when you've come to the end, because you should have a nice, almost perfect space between the point you started at and the point you end off with. So I've done my little markings there in marker, they're very fine, but I'm now going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut in about 1 centimeter deep notches towards the center. If you find it easier, you might want to draw these first and make sure you use a ruler just to get them pointing towards the center of the disc, but most people find it quite easy just to do it by sight, which is exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to start at the front, and I'm going to put my thread going through to the back. If you have got some tape, it might be quite handy just to tape down that thread on the back. Pull it tight and tape it down really nice. Right, so I'm at my front, and I'm going to go directly down. I want to go straight through the center, and what I'm going to find is if I go through the center, I've got 2 notches at the bottom. I'm not going to intersect with one immediately, so I either choose the left one or the right one first. I'm going to go with the left one. I'm going to slide it in there. I'm going to turn it over again. Now I could just wind it around, but I'm going to run out of thread, so I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to take a shortcut to the next available notch. So I'm going to go to this one here to the right of it. I'm going to go in there and slide it in, get it nice and tight. So I'm back out on the front, and I want to make sure that I cross that line to the next available notch, which is there. So I don't want to go here, I want to go there, and I don't want to skip one. So enter into there, flip it over, look where the next closest available notch is, which is there. Pop it in that, flip it over. You want to cross over at those intersecting points again at the next available notch. Flip over, go to the next free one, which is there. Create that big line across again, flip it over. So I've done all of them to the point that I've got all of them done. I've got my thread coming out at the front, and on my last notch I don't have any more available notches, and my back looks like it's dashed with the entry one and the front. They're all intersecting, not at a perfect central point, but they're all looking a bit like a bicycle wheel. So this is what I want, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my thread to actually combine all of these intersecting points together. So if you were to draw a straight line or pull your straight across the center, it'll take you again between 2 notches, and it's taking me between these 2 here. So I'm going to keep my finger there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to sneak my thread in between that V and underneath all of them, which will bring them to a nice point together, and I'm going to tie them together. So I'm going to cut my string first, so just give it a little bit of length. And a little bit tricky here, you might want to use something like a pen or something sharp and thin which you can help navigate that thread underneath it with. An easy way is to just push it underneath, so go into one of these sides and push it under all of the threads, going either clockwise or anti-clockwise. So I'm going to go under this first one. Oh, I'm fiddling a bit. I'm going to go under this first one, and I'm going anti-clockwise. So 1, 2, until I get to the point where this thread left from. So I've got it now all the way through. I have gone, this is where I went over and went under. I went between the 2 notches, I went anti-clockwise, you might have gone clockwise, and I've now come back to the point where I started. And if I pull that down, it starts to pull them all into place. You see how it brings them together? And that's exactly what I want to do. So I'm going to also now create I need the string to leave, so I want it to come through the cardboard and pop out at the back here. So because I've pulled all those threads together, that's showing me where the central point is, and I'm just going to use a pencil or a ballpoint pen that I've got to hand, and I'm going to have a look where that mark is, and I'm just going to mark it just lightly in the center there, and I'm going to pierce it. Be careful of your fingers. I'm going to pierce it gently with a pencil until it comes out of my cardboard. You can see where it is. So I'm going to do a hole on both sides, and then I'm going to feed that thread through that hole so that it pops out the other side. And I've got a little tail coming out the back, so I'm going to take some sellotape and I'm just going to secure that one down as well. So we now need to choose a thread which we're going to start putting on. Because we're going to be weaving from the center outwards, you can keep adding different threads, you can do different stitches, or you can just do the same one as you did. I'm going to start with some embroidery thread. It's better to start one of your thinner threads if you've got on the center, because it's very tight in that central point. So I'm going to start with this nice orange embroidery thread. I don't need the full length of it because it's going to be a big hassle to take it all through all those points. I'm just going to cut off a fair length of it, maybe about less than 1 meter. And I'm just going to wind up a little a little mound of that, just that it's easy to work with. With weaving, you are always doing over, under, over, under, over, under of the threads that are radiating out. So I'm going to start, I'm just going to shove my little wodge through one of the points, and I'm going to pull the little tail over to the end, and I'm going to leave this tail there for now. So I've gone under one thread, so I now need to proceed to go under that over that thread, under that thread, over that thread, under, over, under, over, under, over, and you keep doing that. And because you've got an uneven number of threads coming out from the center, you will never run out of going over and unders unless you miss a stitch or go under one or over one twice. So the easiest way to do this is to just push this little wodge around. So I'm going to go over that one, and I'm going to go under this one. And at first it's a little bit fiddly. Over, under. And I find the best way to do this, you're working with it'll be a little bit messy in the beginning. Keep your tail there and do the first semicircle of over and unders before you pull it tight. So we're going to work from the center, but we work from the outer bits to get our fingers under there and move the thread around as we need to. So I've gone over, under, over, under, over, under, over, under. I'm going to do one more, over, under. And then holding my tail, I'm going to start pulling this towards the center. So I'm pinching the tail at the center, and I want all of that to go and gather in the center. And I want to pull it really tightly to make sure it's going all the way around there. And it's going to disappear quite a bit at this point. It's going to form a bit of a knot and a mound in the center. And that's what you wanted to do. So I now need to carry on doing the over and under. So I've ended off there. I'm going to go and carry on doing the next semicircle. And each time I'm going to tighten it and get it as close to that center as I can, and make sure I don't lose the tail. So this little tail, I'm going to now start concealing underneath it. So every time I weave past it, I'm going to just weave on top of it to make sure that it disappears each time. So I've done a few layers here. My tail has been hidden underneath, so it's just running along there. And every time I'm tightening it, and it's forming a nice, neat epicenter. Right, so I've decided I want to change thread now to get a different effect. So I'm going to go over to this sort of navy blue torn pieces of cotton t-shirt. So I've got a strip here, and I'm going to cut off where I've ended. So I've got a really nice tight piece. Each time I've gone around pushing it in towards the center, pulling it as tight as it can, so it's nice and tightly woven in the center. I'm going to cut a longish, fairly long tail here, and I'm then going to attach it to my next thread. So I'm going to run them alongside each other, and I'm going to do an over and under knot. So if you make your tail too short, then that makes it a lot trickier, which I have pretty much done here. So once you've got them through and they've both come through, pull as tight as you can and really pull all levels. You want it as tight as you can possibly get it. So you've got a double knot there on both threads, and then you can cut a bit of your tail off the two ends there, not too much because you don't want it to unravel. And like we did with this first one, we're going to just keep sneaking it underneath as we carry on with the weave. So I'm going to wind these. This is a bit chunky, so I'm going to do it by hand. So where did I finish off? I finished off under, so I now need to go over this one, under that one. Right, so I've added another few layers, and I've added more orange and gone back to the blue fabric strips, and I'm now going to show you a different stitch. So whenever I change stitches or change colors, I always wait till I come back to the tail that I just made. So the tail I just joined on here is here. So that means that you're always going in consecutive rings, that you don't have rings that are wider or start at different points, or the pattern starts at different points. It just keeps it consistent. So I'm coming in where that tail is. This is an old one which is still hanging in there, but we'll just keep concealing it. So the stretch I'm doing has to be done when you're about to go over a thread. And instead of going over it, you're going to go under it. But before I do that, I want to just show you that I've made a little sort of needle, makeshift needle with a little piece of leftover cardboard. All I did was take a piece, cut it in half, a little strip that's quite strong. I put my tip of my thread in it, I close it, and I gave it an angled snip, and this helps me sort of feed it through. So I'm going over this thread, okay, but instead of going on to the next thread to get under the next one, I'm actually going to go around the one that I'm going over first. So I'm going to go under it and come out behind it. So I'm doing a loop around it. Okay, let me just hide that tail in there. Okay, this one, it's really important that you pull it tightly each thread. So this one is quite tricky. So I've gone back over myself once, and then I'm going to go over twice. So I'm going to go over 2 and back under. So over 2, pull it in tightly. So pull that in tightly there, and oh, I went the wrong way around. I've got to be this side of it, and come out that way. Okay, so what it does is it creates a bit of an angled thread, an angled stitch for each one. So I've popped out over the one, and I'm going to go over the next one and come out under it towards the widest part. So going over, tighten it each and every step, and use your finger to hold it in. So I'm going to go over and under the next one, and hold that stitch while you pull it through. You must pull it through the underneath, so it's going this way around. So I'm going to pull it through, and then I've got to push it back down close to the edge. Right, so I'm going to go again. I'm pushing it down with my finger as close to as I can to get it nice and tight. Taking my little makeshift needle, moving my thread on that side, and I'm going to come back under the next one. So I'm coming out here, and then I'm pulling tight, and I pull until it's nice and flat. Okay, so it's creating 2 nice big angled stitches. So push it down nice and tightly before you start the next one. So I'm going over my finger. I'm going to get my thread on this side because I don't want it to pop out the wrong end. So my thread is that side, is north of where I'm working, and then I'm going under the next one while I pinch that first loop tightly. Pull it back, pull it through, and then release my finger and pull it tight again. As you can see, I've added a few more layers. I've varied the stitch back to the ordinary over and under after the diagonal one which I showed you, and I've finished off on the diagonal one, but I did a bit more orange and a bit more of the navy thread as well. So I've got one more thread left, one more stitch to go really, and I'm just going to tell you how I sort of knot it off. So I've got a little bit of space which I need. I don't want to go right to the edge. It's getting very tight to get my thread through there. So I'm going to go much like I do now. I'm going to push this stitch down, and I'm going to go over to the next one, but I'm going to go under it. So I'm going to sneak it under, and I'm not going to pull it tight just yet because I want to make a knot so you can see how tight it is. Right, so I've pulled the little tail through, so I've gone over it on top, and I've come under it. I'm going to go over one more time, but I'm going to add a little knot in here. So I'm going to go around into this loop and pull up there, and that is going to knot it off. Right, so I'll show you that side on. So I've made a knot which is going around the white string at the bottom, and I'm going to pull this really slowly because I want it to tighten while keeping that last thread tight. So just going to manipulate it. Takes a little bit of getting tight, and then once I've got a nice solid knot there, that is how I'm going to finish off, and it's pretty consistent with the rest of the weaving pattern. So I'll pull that really tight. I will cut a tail off of it, but for now I'm going to cut a short tail and just sneak it underneath while we cover the last bit. So I'm just using a chopstick here because my fingers are now too chunky to get underneath it. And then you can see my completed weave. So the last thing to do is you just press everything back in together. Get it all nice and tight, flattened. All the tails are hidden in there. Any imperfections you can sort of manipulate or tweak over, but as long as it's a nice, tight, round center. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all of these off. Be careful around the back, they don't get your fingers in the way. It has become tighter, so use the very tip of your scissors. If you've got some sharp nose scissors, that will help. Make sure you get every thread. Right, I'm going to release these taped up threads at the back. Okay, and I'm going to remove them all. Take them off of the weave. Then I'm going to lift that central one through. Right, there's the back of my weave, nice and messy. And I just want to use the front of it. Right, so what we could do is we could go ahead and knot each of these individually. So we knot them in pairs to tighten it all together, because if I pull one of those completely straight, it will pull out and the whole weave will fall apart. But because we're making a coaster, I'm going to use the cardboard as a base. So I'm going to just trace out the circle, just roughly. And I'm going to go ahead and cut out that circle. Then I'm going to take some ordinary PVA and I'm going to give it a good covering on the back. Not way too much, but a nice good dose. And I want the nice side to be upright, so I'm going to glue it this way down, but I've got to fold in all of these threads. So pinch them all in nicely. And starting on one side, once you've got them nicely pinched, take your disc, flip it over carefully, make sure you've got it lined up in the way the shape falls, so that way should work for me. Pinch those first threads down, you might get a little bit of glue on your hand, do just that bit, then go around to the others and keep getting those threads under and pinching them on. I might trim this one, it's a bit long. We want to avoid bulk going up there, so I'm going to seal off there, push those in, but you want to make sure that everything is trapped in nice and neat. It's a bit like a biscuit being sandwiched together. So all the threads are in there and I'm applying quite a lot of pressure to get them all nicely down. And then the last thing I can do once it's completely dry is trim over those edges, and if I don't like the underneath of my coaster, I can take a piece of wrapping paper or just something prettier, magazine cutting, and just glue on a nice prettier back to it. But it's nice and rigid, pretty, and will work really well as a pretty little coaster. So here is my finished circular woven coaster using fabric strips from an old t-shirt, some cardboard and some string and embroidery thread. And I've still got the back here. I haven't painted over it or added anything onto it. The cardboard grips quite nicely onto a surface. I just covered up the side using another strip of the navy fabric, and I just added that with glue so it's got a proper finished look, and it's all ready to use. I hope you've had fun making yours.